Ethan had always believed he had the perfect marriage. He was a successful marketing executive, and his wife Claire, a project manager for a prestigious PR firm, seemed equally satisfied in her role. They had been married for nearly 7 years and were the couple everyone envied, at least on the surface. But cracks had started to show in their relationship, slowly at first, then more noticeably. It began with Claire's work schedule becoming more demanding. She started coming home late, skipping their weekend plans, and becoming irritable when Ethan asked if everything was okay. She chalked it up to a high-stakes project at work, insisting that once things calmed down, she'd be back to her old self. Ethan, being the trusting and supportive husband, gave her space and reassured her that he understood. However, his patience began to wear thin. Claire's behavior wasn't just about working late. It was the way she distanced herself emotionally. She'd always been affectionate, and even during stressful times, they'd shared a bond that was unshakable. But now, she barely looked at him. She started dressing differently, spending more time in front of the mirror, and grew increasingly obsessed with her appearance, something that seemed off for someone supposedly swamped at work. Then came the biggest red flag. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan's best friend Liam dropped by unexpectedly. They had been close since college, sharing everything from secrets to successes. But that day, Liam looked uneasy, avoiding eye contact and shifting nervously as he sat across from Ethan in their cozy living room. "What's up, man? You look like you've seen a ghost," Ethan joked, trying to lighten the mood. Liam took a deep breath, his gaze serious. "Ethan, I need to tell you something, and it's not going to be easy to hear." Ethan's stomach tightened. Liam was never this grave. "What is it?" he asked cautiously. "It's about Claire. I saw her last night, and she wasn't alone." Liam began, hesitating as if searching for the right words. "I was out with some work buddies, and I spotted her at a fancy restaurant. She was with a guy, and they were close." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. "Close? What do you mean?" Liam sighed, rubbing his temples. "I mean, they were holding hands, laughing, whispering to each other. It wasn't a business meeting, Ethan. It looked like a date." The words hit Ethan like a sledgehammer. He sat there, stunned, unable to process what he was hearing. Claire? On a date? It didn't make sense. But before he could even start to piece it together, Liam reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "I didn't want to believe it, so I took a picture," he muttered, handing the phone over. Ethan stared at the screen. There she was, Claire, smiling brightly, leaning into a man in a tailored suit. The intimacy in their posture was unmistakable. Ethan's blood ran cold. The man had his arm casually draped over her shoulders, his fingers brushing her hair as if they were lovers. "Who is that?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know for sure, but I think it's her boss, Victor. I've seen him around before," Liam replied softly. Victor. The name made something click in Ethan's mind. Claire had mentioned him a few times, her demanding boss, always pushing her to stay late, to work on weekends. She'd even praised him, calling him a visionary. But this was something else entirely. Ethan's hands shook as he put the phone down. He felt a mixture of disbelief, fury, and betrayal wash over him in waves. Claire, the woman he'd devoted his life to, was cheating on him, with her boss, while he'd been at home, supporting her, giving her space, trusting her. She had been lying to his face. "I'm so sorry, man," Liam said quietly, placing a comforting hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I didn't know how to tell you, but you had to know." Ethan nodded numbly, the reality of it sinking in. He had to know the truth. He couldn't confront Claire without more evidence. He needed to be absolutely sure before he made a move. And if she was indeed betraying him, he would make sure she paid for it. Over the next few days, Ethan took time off work, pretending to Claire that he was just stressed and needed a break. She barely noticed, too wrapped up in her own world. He contacted a private investigator, someone discreet, and hired him to follow Claire, to track her movements and document everything. The wait was agonizing. Each day, Ethan found himself staring at Claire, wondering how she could look him in the eye and lie so effortlessly. Did she think he was a fool? Did she believe he'd never find out? The thought of her sneaking around behind his back, laughing with Victor, made his blood boil. A week later, the investigator came back with a full report. Ethan's worst fears were confirmed. Claire and Victor weren't just having an affair. They were practically flaunting it. Expensive dinners, secret weekend getaways, stolen kisses in parking lots. It was all there, captured in high-definition photos and videos. But there was more. As Ethan dug deeper, he realized that Victor was more than just a lover. He was using Claire to undermine Ethan's career. There were emails between them where Victor encouraged Claire to push Ethan into making bad investments, to isolate him from his business contacts, and to create conflicts between him and his colleagues. She wasn't just cheating on him. She was actively working to ruin him. Ethan's fury turned into cold, calculated resolve. If she wanted to betray him and take everything he'd worked for, she'd have to fight for it, and he wasn't going down without a fight. Ethan knew he couldn't afford to confront Claire directly. Not yet. Every instinct told him to explode, to demand answers, to scream and yell, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she had caused him. But he also knew that if he acted rashly, she might twist the situation against him. No, he needed to be strategic. He needed to hit her where it would hurt the most, and make sure she had no chance of recovering. The first thing Ethan did was secure his finances. He met with his lawyer and his financial advisor in secret, making sure every penny he'd earned, every asset that was under his name would be protected. If Claire thought she was going to walk away from this with half his fortune, she was in for a rude awakening. Once his financial defenses were in place, Ethan set his plan into motion. He started planting seeds of doubt within their social circles. Using his connections and subtle suggestions, he began to hint at Claire's questionable behavior. He made sure her closest friends, the ones who prided themselves on knowing everyone's business, started noticing the odd discrepancies in her schedule, the strange absences, the way she'd stop talking about Ethan at social gatherings. And, just as he expected, whispers started spreading. At the same time, Ethan kept up his act as the loving, supportive husband. He played the part perfectly, the understanding spouse who just wanted his wife to succeed, who smiled and nodded whenever she mentioned working late, who never questioned her increasingly bizarre excuses. It was hard to hold back his true emotions, but each time he felt himself slipping, he'd think of those photos, of the smirks they shared, of the way Victor's hands lingered on Claire's body. That gave him the strength to stay calm. But Claire's betrayal wasn't just a matter of infidelity. It was about power. Victor was using her to manipulate Ethan's business, to create chaos that would benefit him. Ethan needed to hit back at Victor too. And hit hard. If the man thought he could waltz into Ethan's life and take everything from him, he was about to learn how wrong he was. With the evidence he'd gathered, Ethan anonymously leaked Victor and Claire's affair to the board members of Victor's company. He knew exactly where to send it to cause maximum damage. Emails and photos were carefully packaged in a discreet envelope and delivered straight to the desks of Victor's superiors, along with a note highlighting Victor's inappropriate conduct and the potential legal ramifications of an affair between a senior executive and a subordinate. The fallout was immediate. Within days, Victor's name was smeared across internal memos and hushed conversations at the company. He was called into closed-door meetings, grilled by the HR department, and scrutinized by the legal team. The company's reputation was on the line, and they couldn't afford a scandal of this magnitude. But Ethan didn't stop there. Using the connections Claire had helped him build, ironically, through her own manipulative socializing, Ethan quietly dismantled Victor's standing in the business community. He spread rumors of mismanagement, hinted at financial instability, and ensured that Victor's once pristine reputation was in tatters. By the time the dust settled, Victor was forced to resign to focus on personal matters, which was corporate speak for, "We're kicking you out." With Victor out of the picture, Ethan shifted his focus back to Claire. She still had no idea that he knew everything. That's when he began phase 2 of his plan. Ethan started by systematically undermining Claire's standing at her own company. Using insider information he'd gathered through his private investigator, he exposed Claire's own misconduct to her boss. He pointed out instances where she'd manipulated project data, taken credit for her colleagues' work, and made backroom deals that put the company at risk. Each piece of information was sent anonymously, carefully timed to coincide with key meetings and project launches. The result was devastating for Claire. Within weeks, she went from being the shining star of the PR firm to a pariah. Her colleagues avoided her, projects were pulled from her oversight, and she found herself being advised to take a leave of absence until further notice. Claire, still reeling from Victor's sudden disappearance and the rumors swirling around her personal life, was left scrambling to salvage her career. It was time for the final blow. Ethan arranged a surprise business trip for the two of them. He booked a luxurious suite at a 5-star resort and told Claire he wanted to rekindle their romance, to spend some quality time together after all the stress she'd been under. She looked suspicious, but her desperation to regain his favor outweighed her caution. They arrived at the resort, and Ethan played the part of the loving, attentive husband to perfection. He complimented her, brought her gifts, and suggested a fancy dinner at the resort's top restaurant. He made a show of ordering the best wine, of asking the waiter to take photos of them, photos that he knew Claire would later look at with disbelief. But instead of the romantic evening she expected, Ethan leaned back in his chair after the appetizers were served and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the table to Claire, his expression unreadable. "What's this?" she asked, frowning as she opened it. Inside were printouts of every incriminating piece of evidence. The photos, the emails, the reports from the private investigator. Each moment of betrayal, each secret rendezvous, each lie was laid out in black and white. Claire's face drained of color. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes wide with shock. "Ethan, don't." He cut her off, his voice cold and controlled. "Don't you dare try to explain. I know everything, Claire. Everything." She stammered, her hands shaking as she tried to come up with something, anything, to defend herself. I was going to tell you." "Save it," Ethan snapped, his voice low and furious. "You were going to tell me nothing. You were going to keep using me, lying to me until I had nothing left. But guess what? I'm not the fool you think I am." Claire's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, the weight of his words sinking in. She knew then that she was trapped. Ethan had her backed into a corner, and there was no way out. "Here's what's going to happen," Ethan continued calmly. "You're going to sign these divorce papers, and you're going to walk away with nothing. Not a single dime. If you try to fight me on this, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are. You'll be lucky to get a job cleaning toilets by the time I'm through." Claire stared at him, her expression a mixture of shock and horror. "You can't do this." "I already have," Ethan replied icily. "You wanted to destroy me, but in the end, you destroyed yourself." The waiter arrived with the main course, oblivious to the drama unfolding at the table. Ethan smiled politely, nodded as the plates were set down, and then turned back to Claire, his expression hardening once more. "Enjoy your dinner, Claire," he said softly. "It's the last thing you'll ever get from me." Claire was utterly speechless. She sat frozen in her seat, staring down at the evidence that Ethan had so meticulously gathered against her. Every line, every photograph, every damning message screamed out her betrayal, her deception, her downfall. She had underestimated him completely, believed that he would never see through her lies, never suspect what was going on right under his nose. And now, she was faced with the reality of what her choices had wrought. Her entire body trembled as she glanced up at Ethan, her eyes pleading. She opened her mouth to say something, anything that might salvage the situation, but the look on his face stopped her cold. It wasn't just anger or disgust. It was absolute finality. He was done with her. There would be no second chances, no attempts at reconciliation. He had made up his mind. But Claire was nothing if not resourceful. She had clawed her way up the corporate ladder, used every advantage she could to get ahead, and she wasn't about to let Ethan take everything away from her without a fight. The problem was that he'd beaten her at her own game. He'd anticipated her every move, blocked every escape route. She was backed into a corner, and Ethan was holding all the cards. Still, she couldn't just give in. Not like this. Not without at least trying to salvage some part of her life. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice to a desperate whisper. Ethan, please. I know I've hurt you. I know I made a terrible mistake, but we can work through this. Just think about what we built together. Think about all the years we've been married. You can't just throw it all away. Throw it all away? Ethan repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. You already did that, Claire. The moment you decided to get in bed with him. He paused, letting the words hang in the air like a noose tightening around her neck. What exactly do you want me to forgive? The lies? The fact that you were sleeping with my rival? Or maybe the part where you tried to sabotage everything I've worked for? Claire flinched at the harshness of his tone. I didn't. Don't lie to me, Ethan snapped, slamming his hand down on the table. The silverware rattled, and a few heads turned in their direction. Ethan lowered his voice, leaning in close. I know everything. How you fed Victor information, how you helped him undermine my deals, how you tried to destroy my company from the inside. I'm not an idiot, Claire. She felt her stomach drop. How much did he know? How long had he been planning this? Panic surged through her, and she struggled to maintain her composure. It was never about you, Ethan, she said hurriedly, trying to regain some semblance of control. Victor, he made promises. He told me he'd get me a position at his company, that I'd have a future there. Stop talking, Ethan interrupted coldly. I don't care what he promised you. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I'd just sit back and let you and that snake tear me down? He shook his head, a bitter smile curling on his lips. You underestimated me, Claire. You always thought you were so much smarter, so much more cunning. But look where that's gotten you. Claire's eyes darted around the restaurant, as if searching for an escape. She could feel the walls closing in, the weight of her mistakes crushing her. I was just trying to secure my own future, she whispered. You never looked at me the way you used to, Ethan. You were so wrapped up in your work, in your success. I felt invisible. So you decided to screw my biggest competitor? Ethan's voice was dangerously soft, his gaze boring into her. Because that was your brilliant solution, wasn't it? To destroy me so you could feel seen. Tears welled up in Claire's eyes, but Ethan felt no sympathy. She'd brought this on herself. Every tear, every sob. They were all meaningless to him now. There was no remorse, no regret that could undo what she had done. Sign the papers, Claire, he said quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. And I'll make this easy for you. Don't sign them, and I'll drag you through a court battle that will leave you penniless and broken. You think you can survive that? After what I've just done to Victor? Do you really want to test me? The threat was clear. She knew what he was capable of, had seen firsthand how ruthless he could be in business. And now, all that determination, all that tenacity, was focused on destroying her. The realization sent a chill down her spine. She looked down at the folder in front of her, the divorce papers staring back at her like a death sentence. Everything she'd fought for, everything she'd sacrificed for, was slipping through her fingers. Ethan had her cornered, and she knew there was no way out. With trembling hands, Claire picked up the pen he'd left on the table and began to sign. Her signature was shaky, uneven, and each stroke felt like a knife twisting in her gut. But she didn't have a choice. If she didn't comply, Ethan would ruin her completely. He'd make sure she lost everything. Not just her marriage, but her career, her reputation, her future. When she finished, she set the pen down and pushed the papers back across the table. There, she whispered, barely able to look at him. Are you happy now? Ethan glanced at the papers, then back at her, his expression unreadable. Happy? He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. No, Claire, there's no happiness left here. You killed that the moment you betrayed me. But at least now, I can finally be free of you. He stood up abruptly, throwing a few bills down on the table to cover the meal. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the rest of the proceedings. Don't bother trying to contact me. From this moment on, we're done. And with that, he turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Claire sitting there, alone and devastated. She watched him go, her mind reeling. Everything she'd schemed and plotted for, all the power and influence she'd thought she was gaining, was gone in an instant. For a long time, she just sat there, staring blankly at the empty chair across from her. Her world had shattered, and she had no one to blame but herself. As Ethan walked away from that final confrontation, a sense of release washed over him. For months, he had been living in a state of emotional purgatory, pretending that everything was fine when, in reality, everything was crumbling beneath his feet. Claire's betrayal had nearly broken him, but now, with the papers signed, he finally felt a measure of closure. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Leaving Claire alone and devastated in that restaurant wasn't enough. After everything she had done to him, he wanted to make sure she felt the consequences of her actions. Not just personally, but professionally as well. She had chosen to align herself with his rival, Victor, in an attempt to tear him down. Now, she was going to watch as everything she had tried to build collapsed right before her eyes. Over the past few weeks, Ethan had been systematically dismantling Victor's empire. He'd leveraged his connections, utilized every resource at his disposal, and played the corporate game with a level of precision that few could match. But what Victor didn't know was that Ethan's attack wasn't just aimed at him. It was aimed at Claire, too. Ethan made his way back to his office, where his assistant, Megan, was waiting for him. She looked up as he entered, her expression neutral, though he could see the concern in her eyes. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. "She signed the papers," he replied, his tone flat. "It's done." Megan nodded slowly. "And the next steps?" Ethan took a deep breath, leaning against his desk. He had planned for this moment meticulously, anticipating every possible move Claire might make. Now, it was time to execute the final part of his strategy. "Make sure the media gets the full story," he said, his voice steely. "I want them to know everything. How Victor used her, how she tried to sabotage my company, and how it all backfired. I want her name dragged through the mud." Megan's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't protest. She knew better than to question him when he was like this. "And what about her job at Victor's firm?" she asked cautiously. Ethan's smile was cold. "Already taken care of. I spoke with his board members earlier today. They're not too happy about the way he's been running things, especially since I started leaking information about his unethical practices. Once they see the scandal involving Claire, they'll cut both of them loose. By tomorrow, she'll be out of a job." Megan nodded, her gaze lingering on him for a moment. "You really want to destroy her, don't you?" Ethan's expression hardened. "She destroyed us, Megan. She tried to ruin everything I built, everything we were supposed to stand for. I'm just making sure she understands the full weight of her choices." Megan didn't say anything more. She simply turned and left the room, giving him the space he needed to process everything. Ethan stared out the window of his office, his mind racing. He had loved Claire once, had trusted her implicitly. He'd thought they were partners, that they could face anything together. But she had torn that trust to shreds, and now he had to make her pay for it. Still, as he sat there alone in his office, he couldn't shake the hollow feeling in his chest. He had won, hadn't he? He had outmaneuvered both Claire and Victor, orchestrated their downfall with ruthless efficiency. So why didn't he feel triumphant? The truth was, he felt empty. The woman he had once imagined spending the rest of his life with had turned out to be a stranger. A snake who had only been looking out for herself, and no amount of revenge could ever fill the void she had left behind. But it was too late to turn back now. He had committed himself to this path, and there was no room for second thoughts. He would finish what he started, and then maybe he could finally move on. The following morning, the fallout began. News outlets were buzzing with stories about Victor's mismanagement and unethical business practices, all backed by the information Ethan had carefully fed to the media. And then came the bombshell revelation. Victor's affair with Claire, Ethan's soon-to-be ex-wife, and how the two of them had been conspiring to bring down Ethan's company from the inside. Ethan watched the coverage unfold from the comfort of his office, his expression unreadable. Every headline, every scathing article, was a blow to Claire's reputation. Pictures of her and Victor together flashed across the screen, accompanied by damning commentary from analysts and former colleagues. Her name was being dragged through the dirt, just as he had planned. But the real satisfaction came when the news broke that Victor's board of directors had called an emergency meeting. Ethan knew exactly what was happening behind those closed doors. The board members would be assessing the damage, weighing their options, and ultimately deciding that Victor was too much of a liability to keep around. And they would be right. By the end of the day, Victor was ousted from his position, his career in shambles. Claire, too, found herself without a job, her once bright future extinguished in the span of a few hours. Everything they had tried to build together was gone, and it was all thanks to Ethan's relentless campaign of retribution. He should have felt a sense of accomplishment. He had set out to ruin them, and he had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. But as he sat there, watching the fallout unfold, he felt only a hollow ache in his chest. This was what victory looked like? This emptiness? Shaking off the thought, he turned away from the television and picked up his phone. There was still one final task to complete. He dialed the number of his lawyer, his grip tightening on the phone. "It's time," he said curtly when the line connected. "I want to finalize the divorce and cut her off completely. No settlement, no alimony. Nothing. She's not getting a single cent from me." His lawyer hesitated. "Ethan, are you sure? She might contest it and—" "She won't contest it," Ethan interrupted sharply. "She knows she's beaten. Just get it done." There was a pause, then a sigh of resignation. "All right, I'll take care of it." Ethan hung up and leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling. It was over. He had done everything he set out to do. Claire was out of his life, Victor was ruined, and he was free. So why did he feel like he'd lost something far more important? He pushed the thought aside, refusing to dwell on it. This was the price of betrayal. Claire had made her choices, and now she was paying for them. That was all there was to it. And yet, as he closed his eyes and let out a weary sigh, a small part of him couldn't help but wonder, had he paid a price too? Ethan took a deep breath, letting the silence of his empty office wash over him. He had been running on adrenaline and anger for so long that now, with the battle won and the dust settling, he felt drained. The reality of his victory was starting to sink in. Claire was out of his life, yes, but so was the woman he had once thought he'd spend forever with. He had completely dismantled the future they'd planned, but had he done the right thing? Had he really won, or had he just burned down his own world? His phone buzzed, jolting him from his thoughts. It was a message from Megan. "Turn on Channel 5. You'll want to see this." Ethan frowned, grabbing the remote and flipping to the news. He froze as the screen filled with an image of Claire. She looked distraught, her hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Ex-wife of prominent CEO breaks silence." I was manipulated. The camera zoomed in on Claire's face as she addressed a room full of reporters. Her voice trembled, but there was a steeliness behind it that Ethan hadn't seen before. "I made a mistake," she said quietly, her gaze fixed straight ahead. "But I wasn't the only one. I was pressured, manipulated into making choices I never would have made otherwise. Victor, he preyed on my vulnerabilities, used me to get to Ethan, and then discarded me when I was no longer useful." Ethan's jaw tightened. What was this? Was she seriously trying to paint herself as a victim, after everything she had done? "I'm not proud of what I did," Claire continued, her expression pained. "But I want people to understand that I wasn't acting alone. Victor was orchestrating everything from the start. And Ethan, I know he won't forgive me, but I hope he knows that I never wanted to hurt him." The screen cut back to the anchors who were already diving into speculation. Ethan muted the television, staring blankly at the screen. Was this her endgame? To play the victim card? To garner sympathy after she had betrayed him so completely? He couldn't let her rewrite the narrative like this. Ethan grabbed his phone and dialed his PR manager. The call connected after a few rings. "Did you see that?" he demanded, his voice low and tense. "Yes, sir. It's all over the news already, his PR manager replied. She's good, twisting the story to make herself look like the unfortunate pawn. It's definitely going to complicate things. Complicate things? Ethan repeated, his anger flaring. She's trying to paint herself as the victim, after everything she's done. I know, the PR manager said carefully. But if we respond aggressively, it might look like you're punching down. We have to be strategic about this. Ethan clenched his fists, staring out the window as the city lights glimmered below. Claire had outmaneuvered him once again. She had found a way to salvage her reputation, to make herself look like the sympathetic party, all while making him look like the heartless, vengeful ex. No, he said finally, his voice cold and measured. I'm not going to let her get away with this. Sir, find out where she's staying. I want to talk to her. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Are you sure that's wise? She could turn this into a bigger media circus. I don't care, Ethan snapped. I need to look her in the eye one last time. The PR manager sighed. All right, I'll see what I can do. Ethan hung up, his mind racing. He had thought that exposing her betrayal would be enough, that ruining her career would give him closure. But seeing her twist the truth like this, watching her claw her way back from the mess she'd created, it lit a fire in him that he hadn't felt in weeks. Claire wanted to play the sympathy card? Fine. He would show her and the world exactly who she really was. The next day, Ethan found himself standing in front of a modest hotel on the outskirts of town. The place was a far cry from the luxury suites Claire used to frequent. Clearly, she was trying to stay under the radar. He clenched his jaw, ignoring the way his heart twisted at the thought of her living like this. She had brought this on herself. He made his way to the front desk, ignoring the curious looks from the staff. I'm looking for Claire, he said tersely, giving the receptionist a steely stare. I was told she's staying here. The receptionist hesitated, glancing around nervously. I'm not sure if I can. Tell her it's Ethan, he interrupted sharply. She'll want to see me. The receptionist looked even more flustered but nodded, picking up the phone. After a brief, murmured conversation, she looked back at Ethan with wide eyes. She said, She'll meet you in the lounge. Ethan's pulse quickened as he made his way to the small, dimly lit lounge at the back of the hotel. Claire was already there, sitting in a corner with her arms wrapped around herself. She looked up as he approached, and for a moment, he felt a pang of something uncomfortably close to pity. She looked so different from the confident, self-assured woman he had once known. Ethan, she said quietly as he took a seat across from her. I didn't think you'd want to see me. I didn't, he replied bluntly. But I saw your little performance on the news. Claire winced, looking away. It wasn't a performance. I meant what I said. Victor, he manipulated me, Ethan. I was in a bad place, and he took advantage of that. Don't lie to me, Ethan snapped, his voice low and furious. You knew exactly what you were doing. I didn't. Claire insisted, her eyes filling with tears. You don't understand. I was lost, and he made me feel. Don't. Ethan cut her off sharply. Don't you dare try to make me feel sorry for you. You cheated on me. You betrayed me. And now you want me to believe that it was all because you were lost? Spare me, Claire. The tears spilled over, and she looked away, biting her lip. I know I hurt you, she whispered, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed you to know. I never stopped loving you, Ethan. Ethan's heart twisted painfully, but he forced himself to remain cold. You have a funny way of showing it, he muttered. Claire's shoulders slumped. I'm sorry, she murmured. I know that's not enough, but I am, for everything. Sorry isn't going to fix what you broke, Ethan said quietly. And it's not going to change what I'm going to do next. Her gaze shot up, fear flickering in her eyes. What are you talking about? Ethan leaned forward, his expression hard. You tried to destroy me, Claire. Now I'm going to return the favor. For the first time, real fear crossed her face. Ethan, please. But he stood up, cutting her off. This is just the beginning. I hope you're ready." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Claire trembling in his wake. Ethan's footsteps echoed in the quiet lobby as he left Claire behind, his chest tight with a mixture of rage and satisfaction. He didn't care about her crocodile tears. He didn't care about her attempts to twist the narrative. If she thought her pathetic attempt at sympathy would sway him, she had severely underestimated just how deep his resolve ran. But as the adrenaline from their confrontation began to fade, Ethan felt a bitter emptiness take its place. What was this really going to solve? Exposing her, ruining her image. It was satisfying, yes, but it didn't change what had happened. It didn't erase the months of deceit or the nights he'd spent questioning his own sanity, wondering why the woman he loved had turned into a stranger. As he stepped out into the crisp evening air, Ethan hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the sky. Did he even want to keep fighting her? Or would it be better to just walk away, to let her dig her own grave without his involvement? No, he decided firmly. Claire had tried to paint herself as the victim, and he wasn't going to let her get away with it. She deserved to feel every ounce of the humiliation and pain she had caused him. She had betrayed him, used his trust as a weapon against him, and then tried to claw her way back into his good graces with pathetic excuses. He wasn't just going to destroy her professionally. He was going to make sure there was no place left for her to hide. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of phone calls, meetings, and negotiations. Ethan called in every favor, reached out to every contact who might have a stake in Claire's downfall. He didn't just want to ruin her career. He wanted to ensure that she could never recover from it. It started with her current position. He made a few strategic calls, hinting at some damning evidence he supposedly had on Claire. The whispers spread quickly, reaching her employer's ears before the day was out. By the time Ethan received a call from one of his contacts within the company, Claire's job was already hanging by a thread. "She's on suspension pending an internal review," his contact informed him. "Looks like they're going to conduct a full audit of her work. If there's anything shady going on." "There is," Ethan interrupted smoothly. "I've made sure of it." His contact hesitated. "You planted something?" "Let's just say I helped them find what they were already looking for." Ethan's voice was cold and calculating. He wasn't about to get into the details, but suffice it to say that a few conveniently timed leaks and some well-placed documents had painted a damning picture of Claire's professional ethics. "I'm not sure I want to know," the contact muttered. "But you should know there's already talk of legal action. If the company decides to press charges." Ethan smiled grimly. "Good." With that taken care of, he turned his attention to Victor. He had no intention of letting the man who had started all of this off the hook. Victor had used Claire to get to him, had tried to humiliate him and take his place at the top. Well, Ethan had some surprises in store for him too. Ethan called in his legal team, laying out everything he had on Victor's shady dealings. There were backdoor agreements, hidden contracts, and enough skeletons in his closet to put him away for years. But instead of going straight for the legal route, Ethan chose a different approach. He arranged for a series of anonymous tips to be sent to Victor's business partners and investors. A few murmurs about financial instability, rumors of internal corruption. Nothing concrete, but just enough to make people uneasy. Within days, Victor's stocks were plummeting, and whispers of a hostile takeover were spreading like wildfire. Ethan watched the chaos unfold with cold satisfaction. He hadn't just destroyed Victor's trust within his company. He had made it clear to anyone watching that anyone who crossed him would pay dearly for it. One afternoon, about a week after his confrontation with Claire, Ethan received an unexpected visitor at his office. His secretary's voice buzzed through the intercom, a note of surprise in her tone. "Sir, there's a woman here to see you. She says it's urgent." Ethan frowned. "Who is it?" "Her name is Jessie." For a moment, Ethan didn't recognize the name. Then it clicked: Jessie, Claire's friend. The one who had sent him that first damning photo of Claire and Victor. His curiosity piqued. Ethan told his secretary to let her in. Jessie entered the room hesitantly, her eyes darting around as if she expected to be thrown out at any moment. She was a petite woman with curly dark hair and a nervous energy that seemed to radiate off her in waves. "Mr. Walker," she began, wringing her hands together. I hope I'm not intruding, but I thought you should know what's going on with Claire." Ethan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "What's she up to now?" he asked coolly. Jessie bit her lip, glancing around the office as if to ensure they were alone. "She's falling apart," she said finally. "I know you probably don't care, but she's losing everything. Her job, her reputation. I don't even know how she's going to pay her bills next month." Ethan's expression remained impassive. "That's not my problem." "I know," Jessie said quickly, "but that's not why I'm here. I wanted to thank you, actually." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Thank me for exposing the truth," Jessie said quietly. "I was her friend, and she lied to me too. She made me think she was innocent, that she was just caught up in something she didn't understand. But you proved what she really is." Ethan studied her, trying to gauge her motives. Was this some kind of trick? A ploy to get him to show sympathy for Claire? But Jessie's expression was sincere, her eyes wide and earnest. "I don't expect you to forgive her," Jessie continued, "but I thought you deserved to know that, no matter what story she's trying to sell, there are people who see through it. People who believe you." Ethan's chest tightened, a strange, unfamiliar sensation spreading through him. Gratitude? Relief? He wasn't sure, but he found himself nodding slowly. "Thank you for telling me," he said quietly. "But Claire made her choices, and now she has to live with them." Jessie nodded, a sad smile on her face. "I know. I just thought you should hear it from someone who knows her." Ethan didn't respond, and after a moment, Jessie turned to leave. But as she reached the door, she paused, glancing back over her shoulder. "For what it's worth," she murmured, "I think you made the right choice. Walking away, I mean." And with that, she was gone, leaving Ethan alone in his office, staring at the empty doorway. For the first time in a long while, he felt something other than anger. It wasn't forgiveness, and it definitely wasn't regret. But it was closure, a sense of finality. Claire's downfall was complete. There was nothing left for him to fight, and that finally felt like enough.